I never thought I would end up calling 911 on people who were supposed to be protecting my neighborhood. But when three wannabe police officers cornered me in my own driveway demanding access to my garage while waving around fake badges, I knew things had crossed a line I could not ignore. It started on a humid Tuesday afternoon in August when I pulled into the driveway of my house in Scottsdale, Arizona. I had lived in the Saguaro Hills development for about 18 months, and while the HOA had always been strict about lawn maintenance and paint colors, they had never been outright aggressive. That changed when Patricia Hawkins became the new HOA president 3 months earlier. Patricia was exactly what you would expect from a stereotype. Blonde highlights that were definitely not natural for someone in her late 40s, expensive athleisure where she clearly never exercised in, and a permanent expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant wherever she went. My name is Jacob Richardson, and I work as a software developer for a company based out of Phoenix. The commute is not terrible, and I had been thrilled to buy my first house after years of apartment living. The property was nice, a 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a 2-car garage, and the neighborhood seemed quiet when I moved in. I should have paid more attention to the HOA documents before signing, but I was young and excited and figured how bad could it really be. The first sign of trouble came when Patricia left a notice on my door about my garbage cans being visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection day. I had forgotten to bring them in because I had been dealing with a major work deadline, but the tone of the letter made it sound like I had committed a felony. The second notice came 2 weeks later because my grass was allegedly 3/4 of an inch too tall. I measured it myself with a ruler, and it was well within the acceptable range stated in the HOA guidelines, but Patricia insisted her measurements were correct and mine were not. Then came the incident with my car. I owned a 1998 Ford Mustang that I was restoring in my spare time. It was not an eyesore, it was in decent condition, but it was not showroom perfect either. I usually kept it in my garage, but one Saturday I had it in the driveway while I was working on the interior. Patricia showed up within 2 hours with her clipboard and her phone snapping pictures like she was documenting a crime scene. "This vehicle is not acceptable for display in a visible area of the community," she announced without even greeting me. I was elbow deep in the passenger seat trying to fix a tear in the upholstery. "It's my driveway. I'm working on my car. The CC and Articus are very clear about vehicles that do not meet community standards," she said, tapping her pen against her clipboard. "This automobile is clearly not in pristine condition and reflects poorly on property values." I stood up, wiping my hands on a rag. "It's a classic car that I'm restoring. There's nothing in the rules that says I cannot have my own car in my own driveway for a few hours while I work on it." "I will be filing a formal complaint," she said, turning on her heel and marching back to her white Mercedes SUV. That was 3 months ago. Since then, the notices had increased in frequency. My mailbox was apparently the wrong shade of black. My front door wreath during the 4th of July was not appropriately patriotic according to her standards. I had a package on my porch for 6 hours before I got home from work, and she cited me for clutter. Each violation came with a fine ranging from $50 to $200, and when I tried to dispute them through the proper HOA channels, my appeals were denied by a board that seemed to consist entirely of Patricia's friends. Other neighbors were experiencing similar harassment, but most of them just paid the fines and tried to stay under her radar. I spoke with Tom, who lived 3 doors down, and he told me he had already paid over $1,500 in various fines in the past year. He was trying to sell his house just to escape the situation. "It's not worth fighting," he said when we talked over his fence one evening. "She's got the whole board wrapped around her finger, and they will just make your life miserable." But I was not built to just roll over when someone was clearly abusing their authority. I started documenting everything, taking photos with timestamps, keeping copies of all correspondence, and researching Arizona HOA laws in my free time. What I discovered was that Patricia and her board were violating numerous state regulations regarding proper notice, hearing procedures, and fine limitations. Armed with this information, I started pushing back, sending certified letters citing specific statutes and demanding proper hearings before any fines were assessed. Patricia did not appreciate this one bit. She showed up at my door one evening with a tall, thick-built man in his 30s wearing a black polo shirt with a patch that said, "Sagaro Hills Security." I had never seen any security personnel in our neighborhood before. Jacob Richardson. The man said, his hand resting on his belt in a way that was clearly meant to be intimidating, "That's me. I'm Officer Derek Mills with Sagaro Hills Community Protection. We have received multiple reports of your non-compliance with community standards and your hostile attitude toward HOA leadership." I almost laughed. "Officer, you are not a police officer. You are a security guard, if that." His jaw tightened. "I am a certified security professional contracted by this HOA to maintain order and enforce community regulations." Patricia stepped forward with a smug expression. "The board has authorized the hiring of professional security to deal with problem residents who refuse to comply with reasonable requests. Derek and his team will be patrolling regularly." "Team?" I asked. "We have 3 officers assigned to this community," Derek said. "And we take our responsibilities very seriously. I suggest you start cooperating with HOA directives, or you will be dealing with us more frequently." They left, but the encounter left me unsettled. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. Real security companies do not usually hire people who try to intimidate residents over garbage can placement. I did some research and found that Derek Mills worked for a company called Patriot Protection Services. Their website looked like it had been made in about 20 minutes, with stock photos and vague descriptions of their services. The business license was legitimate, but barely, having only been registered 6 months earlier. The address listed was a UPS store in Mesa. Over the next 2 weeks, I started seeing Derek and his 2 colleagues around the neighborhood regularly. One was a shorter guy in his late 20s named Brad Connolly, who seemed to walk around with a permanent scowl. The other was a woman in her early 40s named Susan Garrett, who at least seemed slightly more professional than her counterparts, though she still had the same aggressive energy. All 3 wore the same black polo shirts with their fake security patches, black cargo pants, and heavy-duty belts loaded with flashlights, radios, and what I suspected might be pepper spray or tasers. They started following me. Not obviously, but I would notice their white Ford Explorer parked near my house when I left for work. I would see Brad walking past my property multiple times a day, staring at my house like he was searching for violations. Susan stopped me one morning as I was getting my mail and informed me that my front porch light had been on past 11 p.m. the previous night, which she claimed was a violation of light pollution rules. I pointed out that no such rule existed in our HOA documents, and she told me the rules had been updated, and I should check the community website. I checked the website, and sure enough, Patricia had posted a series of new restrictions that had never been voted on by the community or even properly announced. These included the light pollution rule, restrictions on when residents could use their driveways for vehicle maintenance, prohibitions on any outdoor decorations except during specifically approved holiday periods, and a requirement that all residents must comply with security personnel requests for property inspections within 24 hours of notice. That last one caught my attention. I immediately sent an email to the entire HOA board, copying every address I could find, pointing out that Arizona law does not allow HOAs to conduct warrantless searches of private property, and that any such requirement was legally unenforceable and likely violated state constitutional protections. I also noted that the new rules had been implemented without proper notice or community vote, as required by our governing documents. Patricia responded within an hour. Her email was curt and threatening, stating that my continued interference with board operations was creating a hostile environment, and that if I did not cease my disruptive behavior, the board would pursue legal action against me for harassment. She also noted that my property was scheduled for a compliance inspection the following week, and that I was required to provide access to all areas, including my garage and backyard. I responded equally curtly, stating that I would not be providing access to my private property without a valid warrant or court order, and that I would be consulting with an attorney regarding the board's numerous violations of state HOA regulations. That was on a Friday. The following Tuesday was when everything exploded. I had worked from home that day because I had some code deployments that required monitoring. Around 3 in the afternoon, I finished up my work and decided to run some errands. I needed to pick up some supplies from Home Depot and grab groceries. I was gone for about 2 hours, and when I returned home, all 3 security guards were standing in my driveway next to their Explorer. I pulled in slowly, parking my sedan in front of my garage door. As I stepped out of my car, Derek approached with Brad flanking him. Susan stood by the Explorer with her arms crossed. "Jacob Richardson, we need to conduct an immediate inspection of your garage," Derek announced loudly enough that I noticed a few neighbors had come out to watch. "No, you do not," I said calmly, grabbing my grocery bags from the trunk. "This is not a request," Derek said, stepping closer. "The HOA board has authorized this inspection based on reports of prohibited items being stored on the premises." I closed my trunk and faced him directly. "What prohibited items?" "That's what the inspection is for," Brad chimed in with a sneer. "You do not have the authority to search my property," I said firmly. "You are not law enforcement, you have no warrant, and Arizona law does not give HOA security guards the right to conduct warrantless searches, so I am going to ask you to leave my property." Derek pulled out his phone and made a call. "Mrs. Hawkins, we have the situation we discussed. The resident is refusing to cooperate." He paused, listening. "Understood." He hung up and looked at me with a cold expression. "Mrs. Hawkins is on her way. You will open that garage door or we will be forced to take action." "What action exactly?" I asked. "Are you threatening me?" "We are authorized to use necessary means to enforce HOA regulations," Susan called out from behind them. This was escalating quickly, and I did not like where it was going. I pulled out my own phone and started recording. "I want to be very clear here. You are on my property. I have asked you to leave and you are refusing. You are demanding access to my garage without any legal authority. Is that correct?" Derek's face reddened. "Turn that off." "No, this is my property and I have every right to record what is happening here. Now please leave." Brad moved toward me aggressively. "You need to stop being difficult and just open the garage. We can do this easy or we can do this hard." That was when Patricia's Mercedes came screeching around the corner. She parked haphazardly across the street and rushed over, her face flushed with anger or exertion or both. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, though she was looking at me rather than her security team. "Your security guards are demanding to search my garage without any legal authority," I said, keeping my phone up and recording. "I have asked them to leave and they are refusing." "They have every authority," Patricia snapped. "As HOA president, I have authorized a compliance inspection of your property based on credible reports that you are storing vehicles or materials that violate community standards." "What reports? From whom?" "That is confidential." "Convenient." "Well, the answer is still no." "They are not searching my garage." Patricia turned to Derek. "Do what you need to do." Derek nodded and pulled what looked like a badge wallet from his pocket. He flipped it open, showing me a gold-colored badge that said security officer on it. "Sir, I am a certified security officer, and I am authorized to conduct this inspection. You need to open your garage door now, or you will be in violation of multiple community regulations and subject to immediate fines and potential legal action." I could not help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. "That badge means nothing. You are not a police officer. You have zero authority to demand entry to my property." "Last chance," Derek said, his hand moving to his belt where I could now clearly see a canister of pepper spray. That was when I stopped recording and switched to my phone dialer. I called 911. The operator answered promptly. "911, what is your emergency?" "I have 3 individuals claiming to be security officers who are on my property demanding to search my garage without any legal authority. I have asked them to leave, and they are refusing. One of them appears to be reaching for what might be pepper spray or a weapon." Derek's eyes went wide. "Hang up that phone right now." The operator's voice was calm. "Sir, what is your address?" I provided my address clearly while Derek, Brad, and Susan started backing up slightly. Patricia was screaming at me to stop making a false report. "Are you in immediate danger?" the operator asked. "I do not know. They are being aggressive and threatening, and they have refused to leave my property after multiple requests." "Officers are on the way. Stay on the line with me. Can you describe the individuals?" I described all 3 security guards in detail, along with their vehicle. Patricia was now on her own phone, apparently calling someone, her voice shrill and panicked. The security team had moved back toward their Explorer, having what looked like an urgent discussion among themselves. The operator kept me on the line, asking questions about the situation and reassuring me that police were close. True to her word, I heard sirens within about 4 minutes. 2 Scottsdale police cruisers turned onto my street with lights flashing. The cavalry had arrived. 2 officers emerged from the first car, a tall woman in her 30s and a stocky man who looked to be in his 40s. The second car held 2 younger male officers. All 4 approached with their hands near their duty belts, assessing the situation. The female officer spoke first. "I am Officer Linda Hayes with Scottsdale PD. Who called 911? I did," I said, lowering my phone. "I am Jacob Richardson, and this is my property. These 3 individuals," I gestured to Derek, Brad, and Susan, "have been demanding to search my garage without any legal authority. I asked them to leave multiple times and they refused." Officer Hayes looked at the security guards. "Are you all employed as security officers?" Derek seemed to regain some of his confidence. "Yes, madam. We are contracted by the Saguaro Hills HOA to provide security and enforce community regulations. We were attempting to conduct a routine compliance inspection when Mr. Richardson became hostile and uncooperative." The male officer with Hayes, whose nameplate read Martinez, spoke up. Do you have a warrant or court order authorizing you to enter this man's garage? We do not need one, Derek said. We are authorized by the HOA governing documents to conduct inspections of properties within the community. Officer Martinez shook his head. That's not how this works. HOA bylaws do not override Arizona law or constitutional protections against unreasonable search. You cannot force entry into someone's private property without their consent or a warrant. Patricia pushed forward. Officers, I am Patricia Hawkins, the HOA president. Our governing documents clearly state that the board has the right to conduct inspections to ensure compliance with community standards. Mr. Richardson has been repeatedly violating our rules and refusing to cooperate with legitimate HOA authority. Officer Hayes held up a hand. Madam, I understand there is an HOA dispute here, but that does not give anyone the authority to force their way onto private property. Did Mr. Richardson give consent for this inspection? He refused, Patricia said indignantly. Then you do not have the right to be on his property demanding entry to his garage, Hayes said firmly. She turned to me. Sir, do you want these individuals to leave your property? Yes, I said immediately. I have asked them to leave multiple times. Hayes turned to the security guards and Patricia. You all need to leave this property immediately. Any HOA disputes need to be handled through proper legal channels, not through forced inspections. Derek was not backing down. With all due respect, officer, we are certified security professionals, and we have the authority granted to us by the Property Owners Association to enforce community standards. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. Martinez stepped closer to Derek. It becomes a criminal matter when you refuse to leave private property after being asked by the owner. That is called trespassing. And if you threatened this man or attempted to intimidate him, that could be assault. So I suggest you cooperate and leave now. Brad, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. We did not threaten anyone. We were just doing our jobs. I have video, I said, holding up my phone. They told me I could either cooperate the easy way or the hard way. One of them moved aggressively toward me, and Derek here reached for his pepper spray while demanding I open my garage. Officer Hayes extended her hand. May I see the video? I pulled it up and handed her my phone. She watched for about 2 minutes, her expression growing more serious. She showed it to Martinez, who watched with a deepening frown. They conferred quietly for a moment, then Hayes handed my phone back. Here is what is going to happen, Hayes said, her voice taking on an authoritative edge. You three, she pointed at the security guards, are going to provide us with your identification and your security licenses. Then you are going to leave this property and not return without the owner's explicit permission. If you attempt to contact Mr. Richardson or come onto his property again without consent, you will be arrested for trespassing and harassment. Derek's face had gone pale. We were just doing what the HOA hired us to do. You were attempting to conduct an illegal search and made threats when the property owner refused, Martinez said. That goes beyond your authority as private security. License and identification now. Reluctantly, Derek, Brad, and Susan all produced their driver's licenses and security guard cards. The officers examined them carefully, and I saw Martinez radio something in to dispatch. The 2 younger officers who had arrived in the second car were standing by, watching the situation carefully. Patricia was on her phone again, and I could hear her saying something about lawyers and lawsuits. Officer Hayes walked over to her. Madam, you are going to need to leave this property as well. I am the HOA president. I have every right to be here ensuring our community standards are maintained. You have no right to be on private property when the owner has not given you permission. Leave now, or you will also be cited for trespassing." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Finally, she turned and stomped back to her Mercedes, slamming the door hard enough that I worried she might crack the window. Martinez came back from his radio call looking troubled. "Derek Mills, you are going to need to come with us." Derek's eyes widened. "What? Why?" "You have an outstanding warrant for failure to appear on a previous charge. You are under arrest." I watched in stunned fascination as Martinez moved behind Derek and handcuffed him while reading him his rights. Derek was protesting loudly, claiming it was a mistake, but Martinez was professional and firm. He guided Derek to one of the patrol cars and placed him in the back seat. Hayes was talking to Brad and Susan. "You two are free to go for now, but we will be filing a report about this incident. The video evidence shows you making threats and refusing to leave private property after being asked multiple times. The county attorney's office will review it and decide if charges are warranted. Do not attempt to contact Mr. Richardson or come onto his property again. Do you understand?" Both of them nodded, looking shell-shocked. They got into their Explorer and drove away slowly, leaving Derek behind in the police car. Officer Hayes came over to me. "Mr. Richardson, I am going to need to get a statement from you about what happened here. Do you have a few minutes?" "Absolutely," I said. I spent the next 30 minutes giving a detailed statement about the incident, starting with the history of HOA harassment and escalating to today's confrontation. I also transferred the video from my phone to Officer Hayes's department tablet. The two younger officers went door to door talking to neighbors who had witnessed parts of the incident, collecting additional statements. When we were finished, Hayes gave me a case number and her card. "You should document everything that has happened with this HOA. All the notices, fines, threats, everything. This looks like a pattern of harassment, and combined with today's incident, there may be grounds for legal action against both the security company and the HOA board members personally." "What happens next?" I asked. "Derek Mills will be processed on his warrant. The video evidence and statements will be forwarded to the county attorney's office, and they will determine if additional charges should be filed against any of the security guards or HOA board members. Based on what I saw today, I would expect at least charges for trespassing and potentially attempted burglary, given that they were trying to force entry into your garage." Martinez had finished securing Derek in the patrol car and came over. "You did the right thing calling us. These rent-a-cop situations can get out of hand quickly. People get a little bit of authority and think they are real law enforcement. The badge that guy was flashing, that is actually a violation in itself. Arizona law is very specific about security guards misrepresenting themselves as peace officers." After the police left with Derek in custody, I went inside my house and sat down, still processing what had just happened. My hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and sat at my kitchen table, thinking through everything that had occurred. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Text messages from neighbors, some supportive, some nosy, all wanting to know what had happened. I saw one from Tom, my neighbor 3 doors down. "Dude, did you just get Patricia's security goon arrested? You are my hero." I smiled despite the stress and texted back, "Just stood my ground. They pushed too far." Over the next few hours, I received several more messages from neighbors. It turned out that Derek and his team had been harassing multiple residents, always under Patricia's direction. One neighbor, an elderly woman named Margaret who lived alone, said that Brad had come to her door 3 times in 1 week demanding to inspect her backyard because someone reported she had unauthorized plants. She had been so frightened that she had been considering moving. Another neighbor, a young couple with 2 small children, reported that Susan had threatened to call Child Protective Services when she saw their kids playing in the front yard without shoes, claiming it was neglectful parenting. The wife had been in tears over it. The more I heard, the angrier I became. This was not just about overzealous HOA enforcement. Patricia had weaponized these security guards to bully and intimidate residents into submission. It was abuse of authority on multiple levels, and it needed to stop. I spent that evening compiling everything I had. Every notice, every fine, every email, every interaction. I organized it chronologically with notes about witnesses and supporting documentation. I also reached out to neighbors and asked them to send me their own documentation of harassment by the HOA and the security team. By midnight, I had a file that was over 100 pages long. The next morning, I contacted an attorney who specialized in HOA law. Her name was Deanne Foster, and she had excellent reviews for handling HOA disputes in Arizona. I sent her my entire compiled file and asked for a consultation. She called me back within 2 hours. "Mr. Richardson, I have reviewed what you sent me. This is one of the most egregious cases of HOA overreach I have seen in my 15 years practicing this area of law. I would like to take your case." We met that afternoon at her office in Scottsdale. Deanne was in her mid-50s, sharp and professional, with gray hair cut in a precise bob and reading glasses that she kept on a chain around her neck. She listened as I walked her through everything, occasionally asking clarifying questions or making notes. "Here is the situation," she said when I finished. "The HOA board, specifically Patricia Hawkins, has violated numerous Arizona statutes regarding HOA governance. They have implemented rules without proper notice or vote. They have assessed fines without proper hearing procedures, and they have attempted to conduct illegal searches of private property. The security company and its employees have engaged in trespassing, harassment, and potentially impersonation of peace officers. You have grounds for multiple legal actions. What do you recommend?" I asked. "First, we file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOAs in the state. They have enforcement authority and can investigate the board's actions. Second, we send a cease and desist letter to Patricia Hawkins personally, the HOA board collectively, and Patriot Protection Services, demanding an immediate halt to all harassment and threatening legal action if it continues. Third, we file a civil suit against the HOA for harassment, violation of your rights, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We will also name Patricia Hawkins personally, which will allow us to pierce the corporate veil and hold her individually liable for her actions." "How much is this going to cost me?" I asked, worried about legal fees. Deanne smiled. "Arizona law allows prevailing parties in HOA disputes to recover attorneys' fees and costs from the losing party. Given the strength of your case and the documented violations, I am confident we will prevail. I will take this on a contingency basis with a reduced hourly rate for any work that does not result in a monetary award. Essentially, if we win, the HOA pays my fees. If we somehow lose, which I do not anticipate, you pay a reduced rate for my time." I hired her on the spot. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. Deanne filed the complaint with the state and sent the cease and desist letters via certified mail. The response from Patricia was predictably hostile. She sent an email to the entire community claiming that I was a problem resident who was harassing the HOA board and wasting community resources with frivolous complaints. She also announced an emergency board meeting to discuss security concerns related to my aggressive behavior. Diane immediately sent another letter threatening additional legal action if Patricia continued to defame me to the community. She also pointed out that any emergency meeting had to comply with Arizona's open meeting laws, which require at least 48 hours notice to homeowners and an opportunity for residents to speak on any issue before the board votes. The emergency meeting was canceled. Meanwhile, the county attorney's office was moving forward with charges against Derek Mills, Brad Connolly, and Susan Garrett. Derek was already in custody on his outstanding warrant, but the new charges included criminal trespassing, attempted burglary, and impersonation of a peace officer based on his flashing that fake badge. Brad and Susan were each charged with criminal trespassing and disorderly conduct. All three were also facing charges of harassment based on statements from multiple neighbors. Patricia Hawkins was named as a co-conspirator in the charging documents. While she had not been physically present for all of the harassment incidents, prosecutors argued that she had directed and authorized the security guards' illegal actions, making her criminally liable for their conduct. She was charged with conspiracy to commit trespass and criminal solicitation. When the charges were announced, the community erupted. Some residents were thrilled that Patricia was finally facing consequences for her reign of terror. Others, primarily her friends on the board, defended her and claimed this was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by troublemakers like me. The local media picked up the story. HOA president charged after security guards arrested for threatening homeowner, read the headline in the Arizona Republic. A local TV news crew showed up in our neighborhood, interviewing residents about their experiences with the HOA and Patricia's security team. I gave an interview, keeping it factual and focused on the specific incidents without editorializing. I just wanted to live peacefully in my home. When I was threatened on my own property for refusing an illegal search, I called the police. That is what anyone should do when their rights are being violated. Margaret, the elderly woman who had been harassed about her plants, also gave an interview. I was terrified. These men would come to my door and they were so aggressive. I am 78 years old, and I felt unsafe in my own home. The publicity was devastating for Patricia. Within a week of the charges being filed, 3 of the 5 board members resigned, citing the distraction and controversy. That left only Patricia and one of her closest friends, a woman named Rebecca who was equally unpleasant but less bold. Without a quorum, the board could not conduct official business. Under Arizona HOA law, when a board loses its quorum, the management company or the remaining board members must call for an emergency election to fill the vacant seats. Patricia tried to delay this, but Diane filed a motion with the court demanding immediate action. The judge agreed and ordered that an election be held within 30 days. I decided to run for the board myself, along with several other neighbors who were fed up with Patricia's leadership. Tom from 3 doors down ran. Margaret, despite her age, decided to run as well, saying she wanted to ensure no other elderly residents were treated the way she had been. A total of 12 residents filed to run for the 3 open seats. The campaign, if you could call it that, was intense. Patricia and Rebecca sent out multiple letters to the community claiming that the candidates running against them were radicals who wanted to eliminate all community standards and turn the neighborhood into a slum. They held a meeting at Patricia's house for supporters, where, according to people who attended, she ranted for over an hour about how ungrateful and disrespectful the community was. Those of us running against her took a different approach. We held an open forum at a local community center, invited all residents, and discussed our vision for the HOA. reasonable enforcement of necessary rules, transparent governance, an end to harassment and intimidation, and a return to the idea that the HOA should serve the homeowners rather than control them. The turnout was massive. Over 200 of the 300 homes in our development sent representatives. People shared stories of abuse by Patricia and her board, unreasonable fines, harassment, threats, discrimination. One Hispanic family talked about how Patricia had repeatedly called immigration authorities claiming they were undocumented, despite the fact that they were born in Arizona and their family had lived in the state for 3 generations. A gay couple discussed how Patricia had tried to ban them from using the community pool with their adopted children, claiming they were making other families uncomfortable. It was heartbreaking and infuriating to hear how much damage one person had done to an entire community, simply because she had a little bit of power and zero accountability. When the election was held, it was not even close. Tom, Margaret, and I won our seats with over 70% of the vote. Patricia and Rebecca were not just defeated, they were humiliated. Patricia received only 32 votes out of over 250 cast. Rebecca got slightly more at 47, but it was still a devastating repudiation. At our first board meeting, now with a proper quorum, we immediately voted to terminate the contract with Patriot Protection Services. We then voted to rescind all of the unauthorized rules that Patricia had implemented, refund all fines that had been improperly assessed, and launch a comprehensive review of the HOA's governance practices to ensure compliance with Arizona law. We also voted to cooperate fully with the criminal prosecution of Patricia, Derek, Brad, and Susan. Diane helped us compile all of the HOA's records related to the security contract, emails between Patricia and the security guards, and documentation of the illegal rule changes. All of it was turned over to the county attorney's office. The criminal case took several months to work through the system. Derek Mills pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a recommendation of 18 months in county jail and 3 years probation. He had a prior record that made the judge less sympathetic. Brad Connolly and Susan Garrett both pleaded guilty to reduced charges and received probation with significant community service requirements and permanent prohibition from working as security guards in Arizona. Patricia fought her charges. She hired an expensive attorney who argued that she had not been physically present during the confrontation at my house, and therefore should not be held responsible for the security guard's actions. The prosecutor countered with the evidence that Patricia had specifically directed the guards to conduct the inspection, had told them to do what you need to do when I refused, and had been aware of and encouraged their aggressive tactics with multiple residents over several months. The case went to trial, and I was called as a witness. Testifying was nerve-wracking, but I stuck to the facts and remained calm under cross-examination. Patricia's attorney tried to paint me as a difficult resident who had antagonized the HOA and provoked the confrontation, but the video evidence undermined that narrative. You could clearly see and hear the security guards making threats and refusing to leave when asked. Other neighbors testified about their experiences as well. Margaret cried on the stand as she described how afraid she had been. The young mother who had been threatened with a CPS call talked about the anxiety and sleepless nights it had caused her. The Hispanic family described the humiliation of having immigration agents show up at their door multiple times based on Patricia's false reports. By the time the prosecution rested, it was clear that Patricia's defense was not holding up. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: conspiracy to commit trespass, criminal solicitation, and harassment. The judge sentenced her to 90 days in jail, 3 years probation, a $5,000 fine, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the residents she had harassed, and to cover the costs of the special election that had been necessary to replace her. Patricia's face when the sentence was read was something I will never forget. The smug superiority was gone, replaced by shock and disbelief. She had genuinely believed that her position as HOA president gave her immunity from consequences. The reality that she was going to jail for abusing that position seemed incomprehensible to her. As for Patriot Protection Services, the company dissolved shortly after Derek's arrest. It turned out that Derek had founded the company specifically to bid on HOA security contracts, and he had recruited Brad and Susan, both of whom had checkered employment histories and should never have been licensed as security guards. The Arizona Department of Public Safety launched an investigation into how they had obtained their licenses and discovered multiple irregularities in the licensing process, leading to reforms in how security guard credentials were issued and verified. On the civil side, Diane filed our lawsuit against the HOA, Patricia personally, and Patriot Protection Services. With the criminal convictions in hand, the civil case was straightforward. Patricia's homeowner's insurance refused to cover her because her actions were criminal and intentional rather than negligent, meaning she was personally liable for any damages. We reached a settlement where Patricia agreed to pay me $45,000 in damages and attorney's fees, surrender her home in the development and move away, and never contact me or any other resident of Saguaro Hills again. The HOA's insurance covered another $20,000 for institutional failures in oversight and governance. Patriot Protection Services had no assets, so there was nothing to collect there, but Derek, Brad, and Susan were each ordered to pay nominal amounts as part of their criminal restitution. The settlement money was not really the point for me. I wanted to ensure that Patricia could never do to anyone else what she had done to our community. Diane used the case to establish legal precedent in Arizona regarding HOA authority limits and criminal liability for board members who abuse their positions. The case has since been cited in multiple other HOA disputes across the state. In the year that followed, our neighborhood transformed. With Patricia gone and a functional board in place, we focused on actual community building rather than rule enforcement. We organized neighborhood barbecues, created a community garden, and established a welcoming committee for new residents. We rewrote the HOA's governing documents to include clear checks and balances on board authority, term limits for officers, and mandatory training on Arizona HOA law for all board members. Tom became the new HOA president, and he was everything Patricia was not: collaborative, transparent, and focused on serving rather than controlling. Margaret took on the role of liaison to elderly and disabled residents, ensuring they had support and were not targeted for minor violations they might struggle to address. I served as treasurer and used my technical skills to modernize our accounting and communication systems. The fines that Patricia had loved to issue became rare. We found that, when you treat people like adults and communicate clearly about expectations, most people want to be good neighbors and comply with reasonable rules. The few times we did have to address violations, we started with friendly conversations and offers to help rather than threatening letters and fines. Property values in Saguaro Hills actually increased after Patricia left. Potential buyers were attracted by the transparent governance and community atmosphere rather than being scared off by horror stories of HOA tyranny. Several families who had been planning to move away decided to stay. As for me, I finished restoring my Mustang. I worked on it in my driveway whenever I wanted, and neighbors would stop by to chat and admire the progress. When it was finally complete, I drove it in our neighborhood 4th of July parade, and people cheered. That car, which Patricia had tried to use as a weapon against me, became a symbol of our community's transformation. I still live in Saguaro Hills. My house is paid off now, and I have no plans to leave. I have good neighbors, a functional HOA that actually serves its purpose, and the satisfaction of knowing that standing up for what was right made a real difference. Looking back on that Tuesday afternoon when 3 cops surrounded me in my driveway, I am grateful I trusted my instincts and called the real police. It would have been easier to just open the garage, to give in to their demands, to avoid the confrontation. But easier is not always better. Sometimes you have to draw a line and defend it, even when it is uncomfortable or scary. The whole experience taught me several important lessons. First, document everything. If I had not kept meticulous records of every HOA interaction, every notice, every fine, every email, the case against Patricia would have been much harder to prove. Second, know your rights. I spent hours researching Arizona HOA law, and that knowledge gave me the confidence to stand my ground when I was being threatened. Third, community matters. Once other neighbors saw someone willing to stand up to Patricia, they found their own courage to speak out. We transformed our neighborhood together, not as individuals but as a collective group of people who decided enough was enough. Fourth, real authority respects boundaries and law. Derek, Brad, and Susan thought their fake badges and aggressive attitudes gave them power, but the moment real police officers arrived, their pretense collapsed. Patricia thought her position as HOA president made her untouchable, but she learned that no one is above the law. Legitimate authority comes with responsibility and accountability, not immunity. I occasionally wonder what Patricia is doing now. She served her 90 days in jail, and as far as I know, she moved out of Arizona entirely. Her marriage fell apart during the trial, her reputation was destroyed, and she faced bankruptcy from the legal judgments against her. It is a harsh outcome, but it was entirely of her own making. She had every opportunity to be a good leader, to serve her community, to work collaboratively with residents. Instead, she chose power and control and intimidation, and she paid the price. Derek Mills served his time and was released on probation. Last I heard, he was working in construction and staying out of trouble. Brad and Susan both completed their community service and disappeared from the area. The 3 of them learned an expensive lesson about the limits of private security authority. As for Diane, she became something of a hero in the HOA reform community in Arizona. She has represented dozens of homeowners in disputes with abusive HOA boards, often winning significant judgments and forcing reforms. She told me that our case gave her a roadmap for holding board members personally accountable when they cross legal and ethical lines. The broader impact of the case has been gratifying. Arizona legislators cited our situation when they passed new laws strengthening homeowner protections and increasing oversight of HOA boards. The state now requires mandatory training for all new board members, limits on fine amounts, and clearer processes for residents to appeal board decisions. It is not a perfect system, but it is better than it was. I have also become a resource for other homeowners dealing with HOA problems. I get emails and calls regularly from people across Arizona and even from other states, asking for advice on how to handle abusive boards. I always tell them the same things. Document everything, know your rights, find allies in your community, and do not be afraid to escalate to authorities when the HOA breaks the law. One question I get asked a lot is whether I have any regrets about how I handled the situation. The answer is no. Could I have been less confrontational? Maybe. Could I have tried harder to work within the system before calling the police? Possibly. But the reality is that Patricia and her security goons were not interested in reasonable dialogue or compromise. They wanted submission, and they were willing to use intimidation and illegal tactics to get it. In that situation, calling the real police was not just the right move, it was the only move that was going to stop the abuse. I also have no regrets about pursuing the legal cases against Patricia and the others. Some people thought I should have just accepted the board changes and moved on, that the criminal and civil litigation was excessive. But accountability matters. Without consequences, Patricia would have just moved to another community and done the same thing all over again. The security guards would have found another client and continued threatening people. By following through with the legal process, we sent a clear message that this behavior will not be tolerated. The night after Patricia was sentenced, a group of neighbors came over to my house with pizza and beer. We sat in my backyard, the same backyard that Patricia had once tried to cite me for having grass that was allegedly too long, and we celebrated. Not because someone was going to jail, but because justice had been served and our community had been freed from tyranny. Tom raised his beer bottle in a toast to Jacob for having the courage to stand up when the rest of us were too scared. I clinked my bottle against his. To all of us for taking our neighborhood back. Margaret, who rarely drank, took a small sip of her beer and smiled. I never thought I would see the day when Patricia Hawkins faced real consequences. You gave us hope, Jacob. We did this together, I said. None of it would have worked if everyone had not been willing to come forward with their stories and stand up at the election. We talked late into the evening about our plans for the community, about the families who had already expressed interest in moving to Scottsdale Hills now that the HOA drama was over, about the positive changes we were seeing. It felt good, the kind of good that comes from knowing you fought for something that mattered and won. As the last guests left and I cleaned up the backyard, I looked at my house with genuine affection. When I had bought it 2 years earlier, I had been excited but naive. I had not understood what I was getting into with the HOA, had not realized how much power a small-minded tyrant could wield over people's lives. But I had learned, and I had grown, and I had made a real difference. My garage, the same garage that Patricia's goons had demanded to search, now held my restored Mustang along with my tools and various projects. It was my space, private and protected, just as it should be. No one would ever again threaten me on my own property or demand access to my home without legal authority. Sometimes I still see the video I recorded that day. It has been viewed hundreds of thousands of times online after someone posted it to social media. The comments are always satisfying to read. People expressing outrage at the security guard's behavior and support for my decision to call the police. It has become a teaching example in some security training courses about what not to do, and in legal education about HOA overreach. But beyond the views and the comments and the legal precedent, what matters most to me is the peace I feel now. I can work on my car in my driveway without looking over my shoulder. I can come home from work without finding threatening notices on my door. I can be part of a community that actually functions like a community, where neighbors help each other rather than report each other for minor violations. That is what I fought for, and that is what we won. Not just in court, though those victories were important, but in the daily reality of life in Scottsdale Hills. We proved that homeowners do not have to accept abuse from their HOAs, that board members can be held accountable when they break the law, and that communities can govern themselves with respect and collaboration, rather than fear and intimidation. The Mustang purrs like a dream now. I take it out most weekends, cruising through the Arizona desert with the windows down and the radio up. Sometimes I think about that Tuesday afternoon when everything came to a head, and I smile. I stood my ground, I called for help, and the system worked the way it was supposed to. The fake cops got hauled away, the tyrant got dethroned, and justice prevailed. It is a good feeling, one I carry with me every day. My home is my castle, my garage is my sanctuary, and my community is truly mine again. That is worth fighting for, every single time.